Hello, and welcome to Town and Gown's first virtual lunch at the Forum. I'm Paula McCants, and I serve on the Town and Gown board as First Vice President and Program Chair. As you may know, we normally meet in the Bush Conference Center for lunch. We have done this for 26 successful seasons, so we are not going to let COVID get us down. We have modified our format and learned things along the way to continue to bring you outstanding programs in our 27th season. On a positive note of being virtual is that we can reach new people. I would like to extend a special welcome to those of you who are attending your very first lunch at the Forum. We are truly thrilled to have you with us. Feel free to get into the spirit of our luncheons and have your lunch while you watch. In case you are unfamiliar with Town and Gown, we have been active on the Chapman campus for 53 years. We have a strong partnership between the university and the community. Our membership includes alumni, parents, grandparents, current and former faculty and staff, neighbors, and those who just have a special place in their hearts for Chapman University. Our main goals are to support, connect, and learn. To support students, which we do through our Endowed Scholarship Fund, which, by the way, you can meet our 3 scholars for this year through their brief videos on the Town and Gown website. I know you'll enjoy them. To connect with the entire Chapman family and to learn from outstanding faculty and administrators at Lunch at the Forum, which we are doing today. If you would like to learn more about Town and Gown, please do visit our website at chapman.edu/TG. And now, to get to the moment that you are waiting for, I would like to introduce you to our speaker. Stephen Galloway is the newly appointed Dean of the Dodge College of Film and Media Arts at Chapman University. His program today is entitled The Movies, the Moguls, and Me, Bringing Hollywood to Orange County. Dean Galloway graduated from the Cambridge University in England with first-class honors and came to America on a Harkness Fellowship, the British equivalent of a Rhodes Scholarship. After studying at the American Film Institute's Conservatory, he worked in film and television, both in the US and in France. Stephen is best known for his role as executive editor and producer at The Hollywood Reporter, spanning almost 30 years and winning Emmy Awards as both a producer and journalist along the way. He has created and produced series such as The Hollywood Masters and Close Up with The Hollywood Report. Other notable achievements include being named Journalist of the Year in 2013 at the National Entertainment Journalism Awards. He has interviewed a who's who of Hollywood, including such names as Steven Spielberg, Denzel Washington, Oprah Winfrey, Angelina Jolie, and Brad Pitt. In August of 2017, his account of visiting George Clooney's family in Italy became a viral sensation. And can I just ask, who wouldn't want that assignment? Over the past decade, Galloway has worked to bring in support and diversity in the entertainment industry. Through a partnership between The Hollywood Reporter and the Big Brothers and Sisters of Greater Los Angeles, he created the award-winning Women in Entertainment Mentorship Program and helped raise more than $10 million in scholarship money. Additionally, this past year, Galloway spearheaded The Hollywood Reporter's new Empowerment in Entertainment event designed to celebrate diversity and launched a leadership program for young men and women of color, the Young Executives Fellowship in association with Oprah Winfrey. Dean Galloway officially joined Chapman University on March 30th of this year, just as COVID changed our normal. So unfortunately, he hasn't yet had the opportunity to fully acclimate to the city of Orange and the Chapman campus. However, he brings with him a tremendous enthusiasm for advancing education and film at the Dodge College. Chapman University President Daniele Strippa has this to say, quote, "Stephen is a gifted intellectual who will help bring our nationally ranked film school into an entirely new era. I love his passion for film as an academic discipline and his vision for how our students and alumni can be a part of this exciting industry." On a personal note, I've learned that his best buddy is his dog, Toby. I would like to mention at this point that at the end of the presentation, Dean Galloway will answer questions. You can type those into your Q&A box on your screen, and we will get to as many as we can as time permits. And now, here is Stephen Galloway.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Paul. It's lovely to meet you. And thank you so much for inviting. I wish this could be in person, but I'm sure we'll have those opportunities. I was trying to get my dog to come over so that I could introduce him, but even a good bribe of food didn't work, so it's just me. I'm here to talk about the movies, the moguls, and me. If I was still in Hollywood, of course, the talk would be called Me, the Movies and the Moguls. But luckily I escaped 6 months ago, and I've been at Chapman ever since. I've always been fascinated by Hollywood's past. I've been mesmerized by the idea that a few dozen larger-than-life hucksters and salesmen and wheeler dealers came out here to California a little over 100 years ago. And they didn't just build a business, they built the American dream. They weren't philosophers, they weren't thinkers, they were buccaneers. But they defined our ideas and ideals, our shared notions of what the American dream was. They said, this is what America is. This is what it should be. They shaped an entire century. They shaped an entire culture. And then they exported their beliefs around the world and truly made this past century the American century, much more than any military force has ever done for other centuries. And a lot of those guys had fled Eastern Europe, or at least their parents had. They'd left the shtetls, they'd escaped the pogroms to create a new life for themselves. They weren't interested in art, hardly any of them. By the way, nobody even thought of film as an art back then. They wanted to make money. They'd been in the business of selling gloves and scrap iron. And then they opened a few Nickelodeons. And next thing you know, they were tycoons running their own studios, studios that have dominated the entertainment business ever since. Louis B. Mayer, Harry Cohn, Jack Warner. You can see Louis B. Mayer on the left there, with Irving Thalberg, one of the great executives on the right. They look nice. They were beasts. They were monsters. Believe me, I've known a few monsters in the entertainment business. When Harry Cohn, who was the head of Columbia Pictures, died, so many people turned out for his funeral. The one guy quipped, well, give the public what they want, they'll come and see it. Louis B. Mayer, sitting here at his desk, he was at one point the highest paid executive in America. He was truly one of the smartest guys in town and emotionally dumb as a brick. When he was deep into middle age, he ditched his wife for a showgirl, promised to take her to Paris. And what he didn't realize was he was taking her, she was bringing her lover. He only found out when a private detective he'd hired confronted him with pictures of the girlfriend and the lover kissing and cuddling in Paris instead of him. And he threw a fit in Paris, in his hotel, tried to throw himself out the window, lay on the ground, weeping and moaning. The girl had to hold him down. With a little help from his publicist, he brought the publicist too. They had to do everything to prevent this guy from jumping out the window. Crazy. That's why I love him. I love these guys' mix of chutzpah and bravado and thuggery, fragility. I love how human they are. There's nothing dry and corporate about them. They are so far removed from what the entertainment business is today. Because we're in a very different world. We're in a business of algorithms and market research and subscribers and finding out what those subscribers like that will get them to keep subscribing if you're Netflix, if you're Disney Plus. We're in a world of stocks and shares and streamers and social media. We're in a world of companies that employ not hundreds, but thousands, and not thousands, but the parents of these companies, hundreds of thousands. We're in a business those old moguls wouldn't recognize, that they probably couldn't function in. And I've often asked myself, where did this world come from? When did the changes that we're seeing today begin? Where were the seeds planted that grew into these massive man-eating plants that chewed up the old style business that I like to read about and write about? Obviously, change happens all the time. You just have to live for a few years and you know that. You have to look in a mirror and you see it. There was a galvanizing change, like the eruption of a new volcano range when silent movies came about, when Thomas Edison's little invention of how to make pictures move rapidly in succession led to the greatest art form of the 20th century. I'm going to show you a picture where he first tried it out. It looks crazy. It's a little tar hut. He called it the Black Maria. Look at this place. This is not the world of Amazon and Apple and iPhones and iPads. Then another eruption came with the coming of sound. Third one came with the invention of television. Fourth one came with the creation of cable. But here's what I'd argue. I'd argue that the modern day movie business started with two people and two pictures that set the entire industry spinning and took what was a pretty parochial boys' club and made it the darling of multinational conglomerates. Those two people were friends, and their pictures, the two pictures that changed everything, were made close together in the mid-1970s. And yet, when they made them, neither man had any idea really of the forces he was unleashing. Neither had a clue about the atom he was splitting. Just like most people who unleash change, the change became massively bigger than the men themselves. The first picture we're talking about got underway in the 70s. And it was a small picture that he didn't think he would ever get off the ground, that anybody would want to make. And he was looking back at the past, trying to get inspiration. And he was a young guy, the guy who made it, a bit of an outsider at Hollywood. One of the boys with beards, as Billy Wilder, the great director, called them. And he had an idea. He said, what if we took an obscure Japanese picture? What if we took the skeleton of the story of this film, Kurosawa's film, The Hidden Fortress, and set it in a different time and place? This is an image from The Hidden Fortress. And if I told you now, if I said, could you guess who these two characters became? You wouldn't. And George Lucas said, what if we took two samurai warriors and the princess they have to help, and took their two peasant pals, these two guys, with their own subplot? What if we took all of them and set them in a whole new era? And not just another era, but another universe. And not just another universe, but another galaxy far, far away. You know what I'm talking about. George Lucas wanted to make a picture called The Star Wars. He wanted to take that Japanese samurai movie that was made in 1958 and shoot it like Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon or 2001, all for $10 million. And here's the irony. nobody would give him the money. He went trudging from one studio to another, and each one said no. So finally, he met up with an executive at 20th Century Fox, Alan Ladd Jr., son of the movie star, and told him what he was thinking. And Alan Ladd Jr., Laddie, as he was known, got it. He got it. He completely understood what Lucas meant. And thanks to Laddie, Star Wars got made. This was the script. Look at it. It's not even called Star Wars. It's The Star Wars. And when that movie opened in May 1977, it became a blockbuster. Not just a blockbuster, but if any of you were around then and you knew you had to line up around the block, and not just one block, but multiple blocks, you remember, as I did as a teenager, it was the kind of blockbuster nobody had seen before. A blockbuster that led to a whole series of other blockbusters. Return of the Jedi, The Empire Strikes Back. A blockbuster that made a fortune from areas that other blockbusters hadn't done before. Licensing, merchandising, theme park rides. You're talking about the industrial scale business that the sleepy film industry had never dreamt of. Okay, there'd been Disneyland, which opened 20 years before Star Wars, but the idea that movies like this could be connected to a whole chain of other revenue streams was unknown. And guess what? The big corporations that had just begun to eye Hollywood sat up and took notice. This was the kind of business they understood. This wasn't one-off pictures where each one could swim or sink or drown your whole company. This was about a steady return where the right idea could spawn a sequel, and the sequel could spawn another sequel, and keep the money spigot gushing for years. It was about what we now call IT, intellectual property, and brands and franchises. Those terms had nothing to do with art. They were about hamburgers and McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken. And there is not yet an Oscar for Kentucky Fried Chicken. I've had some good Kentucky Fried Chicken. But their language became the language of show business. Language, as it changes, always reveals what's going on underneath in a society. There is more new language being invented today than at any point in history because we are going through the computer revolution. But that language entered the film business. And now 50 years later, that's the game we're all playing. If you're Warner Brothers, which is now a division of AT&T, or Columbia Pictures, Harry Cohn's company, which is a division of Sony, you're not interested, by and large, in hitting singles and doubles. You're interested in an ongoing stream of big money. And you've got the algorithms to help you get it. A friend of mine, very good guy, actually bought my place from, not too long ago became one of the top executives at Disney. And we had lunch. They have a little restaurant in their key building. It's called the Rotunda, which is also the name of the place where we eat at Dodge. It's very slick, it's very corporate, it's a bit sterile. It doesn't have anything to do with the nuts and bolts of filmmaking and cameras and sound and actors, or the wild and wacky artists and the old school moguls who made the movies that you might still cherish. Casablanca, Gone with the Wind. And this friend of mine the friend I was having lunch with at Disney, said, here's what's strange. When we're in meetings, he said, they're not interested in a movie that makes $100 million. They want a movie that makes $1 billion. And not 1 billion, billions of dollars. George Lucas paved the way without intending. Here he is with what one of those two peasants became. You all know this guy, C-3PO. He paved the way without ever intending to. He unleashed a tsunami that he'd never imagined. All he wanted to do was make a movie that harked back to the pictures he loved. Those sci-fi series you grew up with, where there's stories of good guys and bad guys, with a bit of adventure and a bit of comedy and a bit of romance. And instead, he built an empire. And his empire was so big and powerful and successful that everybody else wanted an empire like his. So I told you there were two movies that changed the business, made by two friends, both around the same time. And the other one also had roots deep in the past. It was a new version of Moby Dick. Remember the novel about the great white whale and crazy Captain Ahab who sets out to kill him with an unrelenting obsession? That's what it was. Maybe this will help you guess what I'm talking about. There was a novelist. His name was Peter Benchley. And he took the bare bones of that idea and he said, how can I retell this for the 1970s? Not with a whale, but with another creature. One that's scary and has jagged teeth and could rip your head off. I think you know what I'm talking about. That's his book, and two producers bought the rights. One of them was Richard Zanuck, known as Dick Zanuck, son of the legendary mogul Darryl F. Zanuck. And I knew Dick, and he was extraordinarily gracious. He'd been through ups and downs. He was fired by his own dad from his job as the head of production at 20th Century Fox, the studio they both ran. And he partnered with another producer. This is him with his father when Dick was maybe 30 years old and running the studio for Darryl. One of the nicest things that ever happened to me was when I wrote a piece about Darryl. And his son sent me a letter, which I still have somewhere, telling me I'd captured his father as he was. And that meant a lot. So Dick Zanuck buys the rights to the book, and he hires a young director named Steven Spielberg, in case you forgot, to make the film. Everything goes wrong. Everything. The weather's terrible. The special effects don't work. Shooting at sea for any film is always a disaster. That goes wrong. And above all, the thing that looks like it will destroy the whole project, the shark, doesn't function at all. They built a model of the shark. Actually, they built several models. Only it looks like a model. It keeps sinking or floating off in the wrong direction. It looks about as much like a shark as Bambi. This is it, look at it. By the way, they named the shark Bruce. Bruce was an in-joke. It refers to Bruce Raymer. That's Spielberg's lawyer. And Bruce Raymer is a very buttoned-down guy. He's a real gentleman. There should be a picture. Here it is. This is Bruce Raymer with Spielberg. He's a lovely man. So Spielberg, at least in the handful of times I've met him, he's thoughtful, he's gracious, he's caring, he's never in a rush. Every time I've spoken to him, I've always been amazed that he doesn't seem like he's rushed. So here he is, much younger than in his photo. And the only way for him to make the film work is hardly to show the shark at all. Guess what? That's what makes it scary. That, a great music score, one of the best ever written, and a great poster. Look at this poster compared to the book. It's an unbelievable poster. So how did this poster and that music and this director and this film, which came out in 1975, 2 years before Jaws, sorry, 2 years before Star Wars, how did it change the business? And was Spielberg the man who did? No. Jaws was made for Universal Pictures. And back then, Universal was headed by an industry titan. You may have heard of him. This is him, Lew Wasserman, sitting with his wife. The last emperor, as Vanity Fair called him. He was the most powerful man in town. He'd been an agent, created a huge agency, MCA, represented anyone who was anybody. And then MCA bought Universal. And then the government made him divest. So he sold his agency, kept the studio, and for years ran Universal. He was a very shrewd man. He was always in a black or dark blue suit and a white shirt and tie. By the way, just like he is in this picture. When I was in my reporting days, I used to see him in the Universal commissary. And I never had the guts to go up and say, hey, I'm this little, nothing reporter. Can I shake your hand, Mr. Wasserman? Which I regret. So now, to understand what he did, you need to know this. Movies were released differently back then. They opened very slowly in a few theaters. I mean, 3 theaters in 3 towns, LA, New York, somewhere else. Then they gradually spread out across the country. And then the world. When I was growing up in England, we would hear about these films. They wouldn't come to us for another year. And the rest of the world then was a small part of the Hollywood business. It was 20 or 25% of their revenues. Today, it's 75% or more. It would take years for a film to go through its first complete revenue cycle. Only really tacky movies opened wide, as they said. Slasher pics, horror films. Look at this one. Astro Zombies, terrifying. Well, I'm ashamed to say I haven't seen that movie. These movies were so bad, the goal was to throw them into as many theaters as you could, knowing that if word of mouth got around, that would kill them. No one would see them. So you wanted to get them out in theaters before people could blink and say, wow, what was that terrible picture I saw? So here's Lew Wasserman, and he had a different idea. So he says to Spielberg, what if we open your movie across the country, everywhere, at the same time? Not in 3 theaters, not in 25 theaters, but in hundreds of them, 600, 700, 800, which then was massive. What if we do it all at once? Sounds good. Now you have a problem. How do you let people know about this? How does word get around that this picture is opening and you'd better get there and see it immediately when there's no time for word of mouth to spread? There's only one way to get the word out immediately: television. You blanket TV with your ads, with 30-second commercials, so that your audience can't miss the fact that this movie is there and you should see it. And so TV, which had basically been the enemy of the movie business, the movie people look down their noses at, became its greatest ally. And the movies became television's greatest financier, one of them. All because Lew Wasserman, that mogul, did what hardly anyone had done before. He bought ads to promote Spielberg's film, 30-second ads, hundreds of them, all touting Jaws. And it worked. As you know, Jaws became one of the biggest blockbusters in history, and it still holds up. And Spielberg is still going, God bless him, has a new film coming out soon, a musical remake of West Side Story. He's still holed up in this little adobe building that they built for him on the Universal lot. And if you go there, you can see him. He's surrounded by old movie posters. He has the actual sled from Citizen Kane. I hope you can see it. Oh, that little kid there. That's the end of Citizen Kane, Rosebud. He bought it at an auction. And by the way, Orson Welles hated this. He hated that Spielberg spent $250,000 on an old piece of wood, but wouldn't give him the money to make his films. And there was a reason. Because Spielberg's movie changed the business that Orson Welles functioned in. Because once everyone saw just how big a picture could be, and how much business it could do, and how quickly it could make that money if you bought commercials instead of waiting for word to spread, everyone started doing it. Now, today, each studio spends hundreds of millions on TV advertising. Every one. And if a picture like Avengers costs $250 million to make, the studio will spend another 100 million just to sell it. And when you're spending that kind of money, you're not going to spend that to push an art house movie. You're not going to sell Moonlight that way. You need to justify it with the movie. If you're going to go big, you're going to go for all four quadrants, as they're called. That's how the movie business divides up its audience. Men and women, 25 and younger. You're spending money to reach all of them. In every demographic, black and white, male and female, country and city, domestic and international. And so you need a movie that's big enough and simple enough to be sold in a 30-second commercial that will appeal to all of them, like this one, Transformers. And this little change, this shift in how movies were marketed, this new way of selling a movie through TV commercials led to this. And in doing so, it altered the pictures that got made. Because you can't sell a long and complicated movie with shades of gray and a very difficult plot in a 30-second ad. You can't hook people with complex, contradictory characters that have good and bad and change and shift. A saga like The Godfather, Lawrence of Arabia, you can't tell what that story is about and grab people in 30 seconds. So the stories became simpler and bolder. They became about plots that you could explain in one line, with much clearer good guys and bad guys, and much leaner, simpler structures. I've always wondered, does our current polarization stem from this? Does it stem from the fact that there were the good guys and the bad guys, and each side became more clear because it was easier to put that in a commercial? A kind of movie came into vogue called high concept. That means that the idea, the concept, was so clear, you understood everything from the idea, just from the poster. Pirates of the Caribbean, Top Gun. Look at that. You know what that movie is from one image. You don't need a whole encyclopedia's worth of information to understand it. Hamlet? Forget it. Anna Karenina? Try telling that in a 30-second ad. The Best Years of Our Lives, which won the Oscar in the late 40s, you can't do it. And this tipped the entire nature of the films that were made. Starting in the 80s, the films got simpler, some might say stupider, and as they did, kids became the audience. And adults started staying away, and the cycle continued. The fewer adult movies were made, the fewer adults came to theater. And the fewer adults came to theaters, the fewer adult movies got made. That's economics. And eventually that led to the youth-oriented franchise, is the movies we call tentpoles, big, dominant, blockbuster pictures, Marvel movies. Pictures that felt more like a roller coaster ride than a character exploration. Now look at how different they are, because these films have nothing to do with the stories that some of us grew up with. Chinatown, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, this lovely picture, To Kill a Mockingbird. And by the way, I'm glad to show you that image because Gregory Peck was one of the very first people I ever interviewed in the business. And I went to his house. I completely screwed up the interview. I didn't realize you were only meant to stay short. I think I stayed 3 hours and he was so lovely. He never kicked me out. And that little girl who played Scout, her name is Mary Badham. And her brother, John Badham, directed Saturday Night Fever. And he's on the faculty of our film school. I'm heading towards the end and I don't have time to tell you about some of the other major changes that have completely transformed the nature of the product you consume. 1948, the government made a seismic shift, stripped theater ownership from the studios. The studios could control production and distribution, but not exhibition. Home video, the explosion in the foreign market. Or how, going back to what I was talking about, the studios abandoning adult movies cracked open the door for Harvey Weinstein, who actually made some of the best movies of the 1990s and early 2000s. There he is, facing trial. I knew him pretty well, and being a reporter is not always easy. I remember being in a hotel room with him in Cannes. I was working on an article he really didn't want me to write about the flight of top executives from his company, Miramax. And we insist on meeting with him. I went in to a hotel room with a young reporter who's working for me, who had an amazing source. And as we go in, Harvey starts screaming, forgive my language, you bunch of mother effing tabloid hacks. Spent 1 hour with him, screaming at the top of his voice, telling me he was going to maim me, wound me, kill me, throw me from the window, buy the Hollywood Reporter so he could fire me. And he's on a bended knee. He's a big guy. I'm not. Spittle is flying everywhere. Now he's gone. So is the business that bred him. And yet changes are still moving forward, maybe faster than ever before. And those are the ones that I'm navigating as I try to chart a way forward and help my new home, Dodge College, get there. Because in my job, you have to think about change all the time. You have to think, what changes are we going through now? And how are they going to affect our students? What changes are about to come that could alter the entire nature of the business? I've just given you a taste of how that has happened. You have to ask, how was the computer, which has changed everything, including how we meet? How is that going to change the entertainment business? How is streaming and Netflix and Disney Plus going to impact movie theaters and television? What kind of content is going to be made? Who's going to watch it? How are they going to watch it? In theaters? On computers? On their phone? What about new stuff? Like virtual reality? Because if someone can invent a language, a grammar for virtual reality, where you put that headset on, like they invented a language for silent movies, the cut, the long shot, no one had thought of them before. If they can create a grammar that allows us to tell a story through virtual reality and immerse you completely in another world, storytelling as we know it, media as we know it, will be turned on its head. And my job as dean is to come up with some sort of answers, to offer students and faculty some sort of vision of what the future will be. Show them where change is taking us and let them go from there. Change is complicated. Sometimes it happens lightning fast. Sometimes it moves at the speed of a snail. Sometimes it's visible, but more often it hides under the surface of things. It's like a riptide ready to suck you into the future. Those guys in the 1920s, the moguls, they scoffed at the latest invention from one studio, Warner Bros. They laughed. They said it was a fad. They didn't realize sound was here to stay. They had no idea a massive wave of change was about to upend their business until their boats had almost been capsized. That's what worries me. That the real change, the change that matters most, is happening right here and now, underneath me and around me. Only I can't see it. I will know one day soon enough, if I have seen it, if I'm right about the changes, and if the people I talk to for advice are right, and I can implement them, then our film school will flourish. We will be the most cutting-edge modern film school in the world. And if I'm wrong, you won't invite me back next year. Or I'll be here talking about failure and what a great thing failure is and how much you learn from it. And you'll be saying, wow, what a waste of time that guy was. So in advance, thank you for letting me waste your time. Hope I get invited back. If I don't, please come and visit me at Dodge. I will be very happy to show you around. Thank you so much and hope to meet you soon.
Well, thank you, Dean Galloway. What a fascinating program you've shared with us today. We couldn't have asked for a more interesting topic to kick off our first virtual lunch at the forum. Before we go to Q&A, I would like to announce that Town & Gown will be making a gift of $300 to the Chapman Fund in your honor, Dean Galloway.
Oh, thank you.
To provide scholarship support to Dodge College students.
Thank you.
And now for our first question. At Dodge, do we emphasize and teach the high concept process or the storytelling style of Casablanca? economics of movie making, or the art of movie making?
By the way, what a terrific question. And there is endless debate about this, especially right now. You know, for a long time, the top film schools were very centered on being feeders for Hollywood. And Hollywood encouraged the sort of simplistic factory filmmaking. And the hardest thing for us is, number one, to tell students you're going to be working in all sorts of different storytelling formats, ones you may not know of. So we are now looking at the curriculum and saying, how can we teach them to think about different types of storytelling, where you're not pouring your material into a pre-existent form, but that there will be different forms. And we're looking at our curriculum and how we teach it and what we get them to do. And the second thing, and this is the hardest, is how do you teach, especially in the writing classes, how do you teach structure and tools without also teaching cliches? And I can tell you, there's a massive divide in how we do that. Do you teach a regular 3-act structure, but then are we pushing students to think in a pre-existing formula? Or do we not teach them and just go with what you feel like, but then are we teaching them? And right now we're in these conversations. And I must admit, I lean on the side of structure, and I lean on the side of the formats that we know, but where you also tell the students, know the rules that existed, but understand you may completely break them. Look at Pulp Fiction when it came out. That is not a standard 3-act film. Look at all the stuff you're now seeing that is mini-series. They can go on for years, or they can be 5 episodes. The episodes can be 42 minutes long or 52 minutes, not the old sitcom style. So let's get you to think about some standard tools that made great films, but also understand you will be working in web series and feature films, maybe games. And it's a much harder teaching process. Really excellent question.
Thank you. Well, next question. I think something happened to films that were not considered for Academy Awards because they did not show in theaters. So the filmmakers made sure their films were shown in theaters for a very, very, very short time, and then their films were considered at the Oscars. Is this true, and how does this work?
The Academy has certain rules, including the fact that a movie has to play for a certain amount of time in the theater. But it's very limited. You know, it's not a long period of time. Filmmakers largely like the theatrical experience because a big screen is immersive. And it's also a great advertising platform for drawing attention to your picture. But there has been a debate inside the Academy about what should qualify. Are pictures that have been financed by Netflix primarily eligible? Should they be included if they're multi-part series? And I think the Academy, this is simple. Ultimately, there are 2 academies. There's a TV Academy and the Film Academy. Dodge is divided into two halves of a split apple. There's a film half and there's a TV half. That is history. It doesn't exist anymore. It's going. And at some point, these 2 academies are going to have to merge into one. Like our film school is now in the process of merging into one. Because the old divide is no longer there. And in 5 years or 10 years, and all my decision making is based on where do we want to be in 5 to 10 years? How do we get there? This divide won't exist.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Pertaining to the thuggery of the moguls, is there a book you'd recommend or perhaps have written on this fascinating subject?
I'm always reading through this book. Thank you so much for asking. There's a great book called called An Empire of Their Own by Neil Gabler. And it charts how these moguls came from nowhere and built this business. I love that book. I've read it several times. And another book wasn't one of the first moguls, but if you want to see what went on in Hollywood, there's a book called Memo from David O. Selznick, and it's the producer David O. Selznick's letters and memos during the making of Gone with the Wind and Rebecca. And Selznick is an extraordinary large-than-life creature, brilliant and mad, and became addicted to methamphetamines, am I pronouncing it right? And I had a lovely experience a couple of years ago. I'm working on a book myself, and I went to the University of Texas. They have one of the best archives, the Harry Ransom Center. There are 3,000 boxes of his files. And because I was looking into Gone with the Wind and Rebecca, there are dozens and dozens of Gone with the Wind files. And he would send memos like we send emails, and they're all there in duplicate, and his letters and his thoughts. And you could see in a day how his thinking progressed. They're really wonderful books, both of them.
Thank you. Next question. What could a freshman film production student do to best support you in your new role as dean?
Thank you. You know, the thing that is, here's the thing I'm worried about. A week ago, we had, I asked for a group of people to go around the entire film school with me as we prepare to reopen on Monday for COVID. And I wanted to be able to shoot questions at them. And I wanted to know if there are answers. And the thing I'm always afraid of is, am I coming up with the right questions? Not the answers. You can find the answers. Do we have big enough and good enough ideas? And you'd be amazed. Ideas, big ideas, are rare. Great ideas. As Paul has said, I created this mentorship program 10 or 11 years ago. It had a very simple idea. Take a young woman who's desperate to succeed and comes from a very poor background, and pair her with a woman who has succeeded. And that pairing leads to magic. And that idea took off. Ideas are rare. Give me a good idea. And you'd be surprised, there are not many good ones. And I had a former boss, I once said to him, what I like about you is I'll come to you with 10 ideas. And you don't mind that 9 of them are bad. And he said to me, to have one great idea in 10 is a phenomenal achievement. I feel the same way.
Thank you. Okay, next question. It seems that Hollywood studios have downsized over the last 20 or 30 years. How many films are actually made today in Hollywood?
Oh, next to nothing compared to what it was. 10 to 20 per studio, a few dozen. And there is a gigantic difference between the mega pictures, that Disney and Marvel make, and the small picture. Those pictures are often independent. There are lots and lots of those made. 3,000 or 4,000 submitted every year to the Sundance Film Festival, of which 100, if they're lucky, will get distribution in theaters. You're absolutely right. The film business has shrunk. And I realized this, I found out the hard way. I was at the Hollywood Reporter, and film was my area, not television. And about 12 years ago, we went from being a daily trade paper to a glossy magazine. And I was doing a lot of the big cover stories, the Clooney and Brad Pitt, and after a while, we ran out. There were no big movie names anymore. It was all TV people. And at some point I looked for, I don't think I've done a cover story for a year. And then I realized this has tipped. And if we don't prepare our students for a world where they're going to be working in all these media, we are failing them. You're completely right. Film is now a minor business.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and that's going to be, you spoke of so much change. Can you tell us briefly how today's biggest change, COVID-19, is affecting not only the industry, but your students at Dodge College?
Oh, it's been horrible, absolutely horrible. And the industry has had to retrench massively, production completely shut down. A few weeks ago, I think it's Warner Brothers opened Christopher Nolan's new film Tenet as an experiment. It did something like 30, 40 million in the US, which is 1/10 of what it was meant to do. So what happens? How many of these studios can survive? How many theaters can survive? How many people working in the industry will survive if this continues, as it likely will, well into next year? It's going to hasten two big changes. I don't believe theaters will die at all, because when television came in, they didn't. But it's going to hasten the move towards streaming. And it's going to hasten something else. All these studios are going to become part of streaming companies. And we're seeing that happen. You are either going to be part of that massive conglomerate with access to money, or you're going to die. And the few that are not, Paramount, Sony, there's no long-term future for them. If you're Apple, let's say, what is your biggest challenge? Your biggest challenge is creating content that people will pay for. Netflix had The Crown. You try and go and see a great movie on Netflix, you can't. You try and see Friends, and they pull it away because they know content is what the streamers need to get your subscription. So the studios are going to need that funding. The streamers are going to need that source. They're all going to merge. 100 years ago, I'll just say this briefly because I know we don't have long, the studios came into being. They had three facets. Production, they made movies. Exhibition, then they controlled theaters. And the middle, they had the middleman job, the distribution. Which of these was the most important? Big D, the guy in the middle, because that was a massive infrastructure. You needed trucks, you needed big cans of film, you needed people in offices around the world to get them and deliver them. They dominated for 100 years because they controlled distribution. Now you don't need trucks, you don't need offices. You click a button. That's what's allowed Netflix and Disney Plus to dominate. And they are going to become the business. You will get a handful of gigantic companies that control the business of selling, of entertainment. And the studios will become part of them. By the way, that's why Disney bought Fox. They weren't buying Fox, have more movies in the theater. They need the content for Disney Plus.
Okay, I said that was the last one, but I'm going to sneak one more in just real quickly, Stephen, and maybe you can answer it more on the brief side. You are known for your work on behalf of diversity in the film industry. What plans do you have for Dodge to build a culture of diverse filmmakers and film topics?
By the way, it is the most important thing as we move forward for two reasons. Well, number one, it's right. It is actually morally right to give everybody opportunity. That is a great promise of America. But also, we will be blackballed by the entertainment business if we don't show diversity. And you need to constantly have an interchange of other ideas to be creative. So several things. Number one, first move I made was to start changing the faculty. I brought in 16 professors of color. 11 of them are women, 9 of them were Black, part-time. Took a whole task force. Luckily, we have an extraordinary faculty, and we all did this, calling everyone we know. Now we're looking to bring more full-time, very diverse, women, foreign, Black, Hispanic. So we have a great mixture of ideas. Secondly, we're teaming with a nonprofit group that I work with called College Access Partnership to create a mentorship program for kids in our community, Anaheim, Santa Ana, Orange, disadvantaged kids, so we can create a pipeline for them to come to Chapman and have that really amazing personal education. And thirdly, we're creating an internal program where every kid, first of all, from a disadvantaged background, has a mentor on arrival who's an older student. But my goal eventually is that every student coming in has a mentor, and that will become what defines us and sets us apart.
Okay. I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for answering all the questions. Thank you for just a phenomenal presentation today. If you want to watch it again, audience, we have recorded the session, so it will be live on our webpage, not live, but it will be on our webpage by October the 8th. Our next virtual luncheon will be on Thursday, November 5th. Our speaker will be Dr. Anuradha Prakash, Director of the Food Science Program in the Schmid College of Science and Technology. She will present Green Food for a Healthy Planet. We hope to see you then, and thank you again, Dean Stephen Galloway.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to be moving to my place in Orange on November the 1st. You will see me wandering around. Please say hello. Please email me, sgalloway@chapman.edu. Come by, have a coffee. I have nothing to do, of course, so I'm very happy to meet you. And Paula, thank you so much. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Joey, for fixing my computer ineptitude. And I really hope to meet you all very soon.
Okay. Well, that's it for our Town and Gown Lunch at the Forum first virtual presentation today. Goodbye, everyone.